Hi, my name's Hayden, and today we're going to be talking about the introduction to HTML, one of the most basic parts of web development. So this is the place to start. If you feel like you don't know anything, you're in the exact right place right now. So what is HTML? HTML is the basic structure of any website on the internet. So basically, if you have used a website, gone to some, www.google.com, you have been looking at something that was built in some part with HTML. And HTML is the original, I don't want to call it a language, but it's the original kind of code that makes up web pages. And a lot of what we've done since has been built up on this, this basic structure. Now, many of you would have seen HTML before. It has a very familiar look. It's just something that's kind of around. If you're studying computer science, it just seems familiar. And a bunch of you would have written a little bit of basic HTML, and some of you might have done a lot more. What we're going to be talking about today is all the different kind of basic parts of it, so you can get a sense of the breadth of what it is, as well as some more fundamental understanding of the key differences between these different aspects that I just mentioned. Now, what is HTML? Well, it looks like this, but what in the world is it? So it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Now, hypertext is a word from the 90s, which, really just means web pages, right? Because before the internet, text was just text files. It was a lot of text, but hypertext was this idea of, this enriched text with like links and images and fonts and bolds and all this kind of stuff. So HTML just says it is the language for how we describe content on web pages, is maybe the simplest way to describe it. It is much more structural than aesthetic. We will come back to the more aesthetic part of web development, which is CSS. That comes very soon. And HTML also does not deal with dynamic state. So what I often kind of describe to people is if you're not really sure what that distinction means, then one of the easiest places to look is to just go to Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is a very simple website. You can kind of just come here and you will see that it is made up of fairly straightforward blocks and text and some basic colors. Now, granted, even this page itself is a little bit more styled with things that aren't just HTML, but this is a fairly straightforward web page. It's made up of predominantly text, tables, these kinds of basic elements. It feels very far away from an app, very far away from a game. So lots and lots of basic HTML here. Now, all the HTML you see on a page, like this up here, usually consists of one of three things, because it's a very simple markup. There's a tag name. A tag name is essentially a block. You could imagine it, like I want to say, square, circle, rectangle, whatever. It's just a description of something. And then each tag generally opens and closes, just like braces with a function or a while loop or a for loop. And inside of that tag, there can be more tags. So it's a big nested structure. It's kind of blocks within blocks. It's a very intuitive way of looking at a web page, and we're going to play around with it a little bit. And the kind of key difference between HTML and what you might have worked with previously when it comes to programming is, many of you will have done something like Python or C, and you know that those languages need to be taken and in some way compiled, or interpreted, but there's some kind of compilation step. And you typically do that via the command line. So you write some code, then there's a command line argument that will run your code. Where something like HTML differs and is quite interesting is that we don't really interact with it on a command line, because the compiler itself is actually the web browsers that you use every day. So when you use Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, anything like this, those browsers are actually the thing that takes that raw code you program and turns it into something. It produces an output, it compiles it, it renders it, however you want to think about it. It's the compiler. And that's really cool, because you don't actually need to even install anything on your computer to do what we're going through today, because by the virtue of the fact that you're probably watching this on the internet, you're using a web browser right now, you already have the tools to run it. So for instance, I can do this really simply. If I just take this little bit of sample code here, for instance, on this page, I've got a little file here called page.html. I just made it. It's a random file on my computer. It doesn't need to be anywhere in particular. And I'm going to go and paste this here. Now, granted, the formatting got lost a little bit there. That's okay. HTML, just like most programming languages, generally doesn't care about white space, so you don't need to stress too much about it. But let's say this is our basic HTML page. Really, really simple. Now, if I would like to kind of compile and run that page, Again, there's not a lot I need to do. I literally would just go and look at that file on my computer. There's the file on my computer. It would be different on, Mac or Linux or something like that. And I'm just going to open up a new tab, a new browser, doesn't matter. And I'm literally just going to go and grab that page and put it here. Now you could go to File, Open, and open that page, but you'll see here, this is using the Linux subsystem. This is an actual just file on my computer, and the browser is rendering it. It's producing that output. So this code here got turned into the output on the right. So browsers are doing the work. Now, the reason that's quite interesting is if we come down here, we talk about what is a web browser. I kind of summarized this before. It's a tool that takes in these web-based programming languages and it renders dynamic web pages. Now, the source code is also available in most web browsers, and it actually also gives you a sense of how this kind of pre-compilation and what it renders happens, is that this is the page that it produces. But if I right-click on this page and I click on View Page Source, again, this is different in different browsers, you will see that here, I can see the raw code. So the browser gets this raw code. That's actually what it kind of, gets given to do its job, and then it produces that as an output. Fairly simple mechanic. What we're going to be doing now is talking about some of these elements on the page and then talking about many more elements. Because just to give you an example, and I'll jump ahead slightly here, I can make this page a little bit more interesting by making my text on this page bold with the B tag. And you'll see if I refresh this page, the text is now bold. But you'll see if I look at the source code and I refresh this, the bold now appears. So this is what the browser takes. It sees the bold and the browser does all the compilation magic and it produces that. Programming to visuals. I mean, how it works is very complicated, I'm sure, but it's pretty simple in concept. So let's look at a bunch of basic elements of a web page. Now, just off this file we have here, you'll notice immediately we have this thing up the top called doctype HTML. Now, this doctype declaration is meant to be an instruction to the web browser that tells it what type of document you are loading here. So in this case, we're telling it's an HTML document. Now, that might seem totally obvious. Generally, browsers are pretty smart, and if you don't have that, nothing bad is going to happen. If I got rid of that and I refresh the page still figures it out pretty easily. It's not confused or scared. But best practice is to include a doctype. It's usually always the same thing, and it will always be the same thing in this course. It's just that doctype HTML. You'll also notice that there is an HTML tag, and generally what we do is when we build a web page, everything on that page exists between these two HTML open and HTML close tags like that. Again, that's just convention. It helps the browser understand a bit more intent. But what you will then notice is that there's two tags inside of that, one called head and one called body. Now, the head and body tag are the two main tags inside of the HTML tag. So generally every web page is doctype HTML inside of that head and body. Now, what exactly is the head tag? Well, the head tag contains what you call meta information about the page. It's basically info and instructions that don't pertain to rendering the page. It has nothing to do with how the page looks. Now, early on when you're working with HTML, this section is going to be mostly irrelevant to you, and you probably don't need to waste much time thinking about it. But the simple examples of why this can be useful is that you can use it to include a fav icon. Fav icons are these little icons up here. See the little search there or the little CSE logo. They're all icons that this web page itself, well, in this case, it's a PDF, but when I go to Wikipedia, you'll see that little icon changes. That's Wikipedia here. If I open up Wikipedia's source code, yeah, it's very complicated. But you can actually see here, it says that the shortcut icon, the little icon up here, is this particular image, which looks like that. So all of the instructions about things not to do with the page itself and how the page looks are sitting in that head. And that also includes including other files. So if you've done C, think of hash include. If you've done Python, think of import or JavaScript import. It's obviously not even remotely like that, but it's the same concept of like you're trying to pull things into the page so that the page can do the work, right? So that is what the head area is for. On the contrary, the body area is for everything that kind of appears on the page. So the body is all the information to render the page for how it should look. Most things inside the body tag are about that white content on the page there. So if we go back, for instance, to here, you'll see that everything in hi here is the body. If I write hi, how are you, and I save and refresh, that text now appears. You'll also notice though that this title tag that we saw before but kind of didn't talk about, that's actually the title of the web page. It's actually what the tab is called. So if I wanted to call this my first web page, that will actually update that. So that's where, for instance, when we go back to Wikipedia, because it's a fun, easy example, you'll see that this source code has a title called Wikipedia here. But if I click on this, it says Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. And now when I go and open the page source, you will see another title tag here, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. So the head has all that metadata information. The heads on some pages are massive. Just for fun, there's a whole bunch of other interesting info here. For instance, all these OG things are the instructions that when you ever take a web page and you paste it in like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and it like pre-populates little icons and text and things, all of that information sitting inside the head. So it's all the metadata. That's why that's why we call it meta information. So that's the body. Now, everything else we're going to be talking about today is really just about different things we can render on the page, different things we can put inside the body tags. And they're all quite simple, which is great. But let's start scrolling through it. Cool. Layout tags are some of the most basic parts of a web page. And essentially, they help separate our page into different structures. Some of them have really simple properties. Some of them have much more complex properties. You can see a handful here. What I might do is I might go and, well, we don't need to copy and paste it, but let's talk through some of them. So in no particular order, I might even start from the bottom just to make things a bit more interesting. You'll see that we have 3 at the bottom, which is U for underlined text, I for italics, B for bold. So if we come back to our page now, you'll be able to see that I can write some text that's like, B bold, and then I could say I italics, and then I could say U underlined like this. And then if I refresh my page, I'll have 3 different types of text. Now I can combine those two. If I want a bold italic, I can just kind of nest them, if you will. Like, again, if you've done basic programming, you know that a lot of programming is kind of nesting structures, right? You got functions, and then maybe a function, and then variables, and then loops, So you get that kind of tree-like, nested-like structure that's inherent to what you're doing. So you can combine them like this. You could wrap everything in a certain tag. You could make everything there underlined. Obviously, if you have an underline within an underline, the browser's smart enough to ignore it. Like, it doesn't double underline it or anything like that. So that's super cool. Really simple. They're simple layout tags. I mean, you could call them formatting tags, really. I mean, there's not like a formal definition there, but these are all basic tags, really. We've got a table. So HTML is capable of generating tables. Now, tables are quite interesting in HTML. They're basically made up of rows and then cells. So if I've got a table here that does nothing, but I can create a row, and then inside of that row, I can create a cell, and I'll call it cell 1. And then I can create another cell called cell 2. And now I have a little table like this. And then I can come along and make a couple more rows with more cells in it. So that's how if you see a table, sometimes that's how these tables are generated. Now, early on in this lecture, we talked about how with HTML, there are some key components of it, which is a tag name, table B underlined italics, and then a series of attribute pairs, which are these things here. So you kind of get 1, the tag name, and you kind of get 3 because we've put a italics inside a bold. You get that nesting. But this series of attribute value pairs means that each tag kind of has properties that we can give it. Now, generally, this isn't super popular because we like to use CSS, which comes in another lecture, to add a lot of properties and styles and aesthetics to a particular tag. But in this case, I'll just show you a really old school property, which is the attribute border and the value 1. And when I do that, you'll see that it actually adds a border to my table. And I could make a really thick border too if I wanted to, And this looks like very retro internet here. But this is what HTML can do. So that's what a table looks like. Now we have our unordered lists and our ordered lists. So these are 2 types of ways of listing information. And what that means is that if I have an unordered list is like a grouping of things. And inside of that grouping, what I do is I create list items. So a list item, for instance, might be like item 1. I might create a few of those, item 2 and item 3. And because it's an unordered list, what that means is that it's just dot points. So I have item 1, item 2, item 3, just as 3 different dot points. Whereas if I have an ordered list, which is an OL, it's where I get numbers there. So this OL is a numbered list. That's why they call it an ordered list. And yeah, there's a lot of ways you can tweak this to use A or capital A instead of 1, 2, 3. You can change those circles to diamonds. There's lots of configuration you can do. But these lists themselves, they don't just kind of exist. You can configure them in some ways. There's a lot you can do with CSS that we'll talk about later. You can add a bunch of properties. For instance, I could say that my list I want to start at number 50, and now it starts at number 50. You can find most of this information too just by Googling it by, you pick a tag and you write HTML OL. And you'll generally see a W3 Schools website, which is really good for basic understanding. And they'll take you through a bunch of things like that you can reverse a list, for instance. And you're like, oh, that sounds really interesting. So you click on that, which doesn't take you anywhere. There you go, OL reverse. So now I can come here and I can add reversed here. So now it will go, I think, down to 51. Or no, it'll start at 50, 50 at the bottom. Oh, start at the top. Okay, sorry. So you see 50, 49, 48. So lots and lots of configuration. Again, that all just comes out of a quick Google. It's all pretty straightforward. So that's unordered lists and ordered lists. We have a bunch of headers in HTML. These are basically just chunky pieces of text at different sizes. So if I want to, for instance, add some, I could add header 1, hello. Let's make all the different types of headers. So we've got header 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there you go. There's all the different types of headers. And then just let's compare normal text here. Hello. See what it looks like comparatively. So, and you might look at that and think, oh, they look strange. Well, the cool thing about what we learn in the next lecture is that you can actually go and change how these things look. You can change the font, the size, the color. The point of HTML is not to color things, size things, shape things. It is to provide the fundamental structure. It is to say, we have a header here, we have some paragraphs here, we have an image here, we have some links here, we have some lists here. And then you go later and you color it. That's why I say Wikipedia is kind of a bit of a boring website, which is because it's just a lot of fairly basic HTML, which is good. That's why it's such an easy website to use. So that leaves us with just a few kind of remaining proper layout tags. And these layout tags are really common. You'll use them a lot, but they are kind of hard to explain early on. A good example is the P tag or the paragraph tag. So the paragraph tag is really, as it's stated, if you just write text normally, like say, hello, how are you? What are you doing? Like this. I am good. Here's the thing about that. In HTML, this will all appear in one straight line because HTML ignores white space. So just because I've put this new line here, HTML, just like normal, it just doesn't care. So if we want to kind of break those up, then one way to do it is to wrap these things in paragraphs. So now I'm saying that, okay, I've actually got 3 small paragraphs here, and a paragraph tag needs to be open and closed, just like other tags. And now that is broken up a little bit more nicely like this. So this is a really common way to space text. And you'll see that again, like look at Wikipedia somewhere, like a web page. Where's a good page? Some things like this. These would all be paragraph tags. Like I'm sure if you viewed the page source, let's search it up. The move to all big gun. Okay. Yeah, see paragraph tags there. That's how they break up that text. So paragraphs text really simple. Spans and divs are a bit more interesting. These are kind of what you would call, they're kind of styleless tags in the sense that they don't really have much inherent properties, and that's good because they're kind of like a blank canvas. When you start a new Word document or a new Canva presentation and there's all the templates and then you just pick, no, create my own kind of thing. It's a little bit like that. It's like a blank canvas for you to do what you want with it. The main difference is that span is like a truly blank canvas and div is for blocks of things. And what I mean by that is you'll see if I just do like span high like this, you'll see that how it renders on the page is just 4 highs. But if I do 4 divs, for instance, those divs actually all form little boxes. They're all like their own line. So div is when you want to start creating box-like structures, and span is when you don't. The short story is that div is the kind of universal basic empty tag's not the right word. It's the universal basic kind of styleless tag to design structures on web pages, and span is the universal stylus tag for text. So you use span with text, div with everything else. But again, that'll become much clearer in subsequent lectures, particularly when we go through CSS stuff. Now, formatting tags, obviously these were in the previous slide as like layout tags, but this is just like flow on. So I know I called them layout tags. These are essentially layout tags. You could argue H1 and H6 again is not really formatting. Doesn't really matter. These are just tags, but bold, italics, underline, they change the color. Generally, I'd say that you won't use some of these as much. Tables are pretty not that useful nowadays. We'll get into that later, but a lot of divs, span p, the headers, the lists in particular, like a lot of these top ones here are very commonly used, I would say, particularly these top two. Okay, well, that was a lot of basic looky-loo of a page. Lots of little fun things. We're going to try and have a bit more excitement now. So that was a lot of basic tags. Let's start to look at the more interesting ones. So the anchor tag is a really common, popular tag as well. The anchor tag is basically how we link from one resource to another. Now, this can be a whole bunch of things. This can be links to external pages. This can be links to internal pages. And it's like if I go and get this Dreadnought Wikipedia page that we randomly found, what I can do is if I was to say here, I love the Dreadnought, check it out here. If I just go and put that text on the page, that text right now is just text. I might go and put this at the top, just so we don't have to keep scrolling down and get my stupid face in the way. So, yep, there's our text. I love the Dreadnought, check it out here. I might put that in a paragraph because you can see the formatting is all weird. The layout is all strange. Sorry, can't type. Yep, so I love the Dreadnought. Now, if I want to link that text, check it out here, to a web page, I simply wrap it in an anchor tag. Now, an anchor tag by itself is not very powerful. All it's really going to do is, well, frankly, nothing. But if I give it a hyperlink reference, I think it's hyperlink reference, to that link, what that now says is that when someone clicks on the stuff, but inside my tag, I would like you to send them to this hyperlink. So now when I click that, it sends me to the Dreadnought page. So that's an example of the tag A with the attribute href with the value Dreadnought, the URL. Now there are more attributes you can add. For instance, I can add a title tag called Dreadnought Wikipedia page. And if I add this title tag, what this does is when I put my mouse over it, it comes up and tells me what that link is. And you'll see this all the time on the internet now when you look at like a link like this, or like a link like, what's a good example? There'll be some here. Here you go. Anything, sometimes web pages don't really do it. Wikipedia probably has a bunch of stuff because they're pretty simple. That's a fancy one. Everyone's got such fancy things. There you go. View history. Past revisions of this page, Alt-Shift-H. There you go. I didn't know you could do that. Alt-Shift-H. Shortcuts. The things you learn. But we can also, if we'd like to, instruct it to actually open it in a new tab by going target equals _ blank, which essentially means the target of where this goes is in a blank page, blank tab. That's how when you click on links, sometimes they open up a new tab. Someone's actually coded that in the HTML to specify, where and how that should go. So that's super interesting. So that's the basics of links. You can link internally and you can link not internally too. So you'll see that some links like this are just to Wikipedia outright. Other links like this, particularly ones that don't start with HTTP or HTTPS, they are linking kind of internally. So you'll see, for instance, here that there's and this is on Wikipedia's source code, they have an href to this here, but have a look at this website. It's en.wikipedia.org. So when I click on this, it's telling me that I would like to go to en.wikipedia.org/wiki/file USS Texas. So when I click that, it takes me to that file. So if you're kind of sending within your website, you don't really need that HTTP or the full URL, but if you're sending away from your website, you do need that. That'll make a bit more sense as we go as well. Now, another fun tag is the image tag. The image tag is one of many HTML properties that is known as a void tag, and it's kind of our first interaction with a void tag. A void tag is a tag that doesn't have anything inside of it. There's no open image, close image, because the tag design does not do anything with the components inside, and therefore it doesn't have open close, it just has this. It's like image, and then at the end of it, it's that little slash right angle thing. Yeah, side arrow, whatever they call it. So for instance, if I was to go and add an image to my page, it might look like this image. That's the image tag. There's no open image, close image. It's just image, like this. But the way it renders stuff is by taking in a whole bunch of attributes like this. Source, alt, width, height, and we'll look at a few of these. But I can literally just go and grab an image off the internet called mini dog. And then I go find a mini dog. What's a really cute mini dog? Oh, that's pretty cute. Yeah. And I just go and grab that image, and all I have to do now is on my page say that the source of that image is that URL. And when I refresh my page, suddenly there's a mini dog there. But you see the mini dog's really big, so I can maybe add some attributes here that say, you know, width equals 300, height equals 600, like that. And now the mini dog will be, oops, I got those the wrong way around. Height should be 300, width should be 600. And now I have that little mini dog on my page. I could make that even smaller, width 200, sorry, width 400, height 200. And then we have our little mini dog right there. Now I can also add an alt tag. An alt tag is an alternative to if the image doesn't load, which is really useful in cases where, say, like, you know, maybe the URL's down, or for instance, there's a typo here. See, so now it says mini dog. We'll come back to why this is useful back in like the middle of the learning in this course, but it comes up basically when the image fails to load. So that's how we add an image to the web page. Now, you don't necessarily have to always load it from an external source. What I could do here is I could actually go and grab that image. And if I click save, I can save it to a folder on my computer. And I've just saved it to my example folder, right? So I've just saved it here, small dog breeds. I'll just call this mini dog. I'll rename the image to mini dog. And now, why this is cool is because because it's in the same folder, I can actually literally just say that the source is minidog.jpg, and this will still work for me. So now this is being loaded from the file, right? Like as in the file on my computer. So this folder here with my HTML, it's got my page and my mini dog. So most websites kind of have their HTML, their images all kind of in a folder somewhere is how to think about it. And therefore pages can just reference them. That's what Wikipedia is doing, because Wikipedia is quite literally just, in these cases you've seen here, it's just storing all these files somewhere, you know, or this is another link to another web page. So you can kind of understand how everything is quite well contained. So that's the image tag. And it was our first example of a void tag. Now, another void tag that we haven't talked about that we kind of glossed over was the line break tag. So the line break tag is an easy way to break up lines of text as well. It's like kind of a semi-alternative to paragraphs in the sense that you can kind of use this instead of paragraphs in certain instances. You'll see here that when I use BR here, I've now broken that up into multiple lines. It's basically just like the enter key. It's the equivalent of what you think a new line would normally do. It's not necessarily better or worse than a paragraph tag. It is just different. A paragraph tag will inherently create spacing between chunks. Whereas say if I came down here and I replaced this paragraph stuff with a new line, you would see that it would not, it'd be more kind of tight like that. So paragraph is a great way to get that kind of inherent layout benefit. So yeah, that's the use of that. Now, we're about halfway through. We've also got forms. Forms is a lot to unpack. These are all forms here, so we're gonna go through each of these slides, right? That's most of the rest of the lecture really. Because forms are still kind of the majority of where you'll be dealing with unique HTML, I'd say. Now, a form covered when we do DOM manipulation and JavaScript in a bit more detail, but in essence, a form is just a section that contains a series of inputs. Now, you've interacted with forms all the time, right? Like, let's say you go to Google. You could argue that this here is a form. It's an input, and then you search it, right? There would be lots of websites like this. There's a form as well. It's not just search bars. Let's say I go to view history. This is forms here where you can like select things, different inputs, for instance, like that. Forms are everywhere. But a form tag, which is what we're really talking about, is just a grouping of all of these elements. So it's not super clear exactly what the relevance of this form wrapper is yet. It'll make more sense once we go through some of the inputs. So I'm mostly going to look at what's inside of a form. So if I come back up the top here, and I'm going to go make a form block like this. And now let's look at what we can put inside the form. Now, probably the most common thing to put inside a form is an input. An input is quite literally that kind of rectangle thing where you can type in, generally, right? That's the most common form of input, but there are other types of inputs like the radio buttons, the checkboxes, there are hidden inputs. What else we got? Well, that's the main three we're talking about. So let's look at a few examples. So one simple input is our text input, and all these different types of inputs are distinguished by their type. So up here you can see this is my text input here that has a certain type. You can also have another input that is number. This is a newer type of input. I might use BR here to help separate these out. A number input will generally only take in numbers. It's rendered by the browser. So a text input will take in anything. A number input, if I type in letters, nothing is happening. But if I type in numbers, lots happens, and you can press up and down to kind of, that's me pressing up on my keyboard, right? Like a lot of times. So, and then, you know, down, up, down, up. So they're two really simple types of like text or number inputs. I think there's also another that's like email. Could be wrong. I can't remember. I'll look that up later. It doesn't matter. You can Google all this stuff, right? Again, it's like HTML form input types. And straight away, you'll get another W3 Schools page where they look at all this stuff. You got dates. Like dates is another type of input. Some of these inputs are actually kind of new, and as in they've kind of appeared in the last 10 years, because what this means is that rather than programmers have to go and build all these complicated web pages with like date pickers, and it's a lot of coding to get this right, they just say, you know what, browser, you do it. So this is all done in this case by the Microsoft Edge browser. I don't really use this normally, but it's all just kind of this. So this is all done in browser just because I said it's a date as opposed to a number or text. So you can go look up many other types of that if you'd like. But in terms of these inputs, most of the time what you'll see is that each input will have some kind of ID or name. This might be called, you know, your, let's call it like first name. And I'll say put first name here like this. We'll simplify that page down. And then you enter your first name in there. But you can also put like a placeholder in. You know, so placeholder might be like John Doe, a fairly generic name. And this is how this appears. Have you ever seen on a web page that there's text that's kind of gray, and when you click on it and you type, it disappears? That's, again, that used to be kind of hand programmed back in the day, but now it's just a property. And there's so many more properties that you can use than just what we're looking at here. So that's a text input. We also have radio and checkbox inputs. So a radio input type equals radio, and a checkbox input will look very familiar to you, right? Like this. But the main difference between them is generally a radio input is for when you have many options and only one should be clickable, and a checkbox input is for when you might have many options but all of them can be clickable. So I'll give you a good example. An example radio button might be, what's your, you know, age? And then we, you know, use a BR, and then we'll say, you know, 18 to 25, 25 to 35, 35 plus, or something like this. And then we'll go and put a radio next to each of those. Now, you can't be all three of those or more than one of those at a time, right? But you'll see right now, if I try and click on them, I can select them all. And the reason for that is that the browser does not inherently know that they're related. Because you could imagine you might have many different groups of radio inputs on the page. So I actually need to kind of give it a name, and I might call it age. Now the name tag is used by forms on the browser to figure out what are related. So now when I click on these, they're all kind of mutually exclusive because of that name property. Whereas if I come down here and we say we have another thing that's like, you know, what would you call it? Hobbies, we'll say. And the hobbies might be like, you know, dancing, singing, running. We might have a checkbox here, but you can select, you know, as many of these checkboxes as you'd like because they're checkboxes. Checkboxes are all turned on and off independently. You know, so they're kind of the three key types of inputs. There is many more. There are hidden inputs. There's that big list we saw before, but there are all ways of just capturing user input. You can disable any type of input as well. So I can make this one disabled, which means I can't edit it. You can make a radio disable, which means you can't click it. Now, all of this might seem kind of pointless in a static sense because you're like, why would I disable it? Why would it be there if it's disabled? Well, later on when we learn about JavaScript and how you can dynamically modify web pages, that's when you'll start to see, oh, okay, there are actually times where, say, you know, if someone, you know, clicks on 35 plus, you might disable the running one because they're too old to run or something. Obviously they're not, but you know what I mean? You might have some kind of rule set around that. And that's what we'll do when we get into the dynamic parts of things. So that is inputs. We have another few types of inputs that aren't just like standard inputs. One of them is a text area. A text area is the big blocks of text that you've seen. Text area, hello. Doesn't matter, we don't need anything inside of that. Text areas do actually have, they're kind of built a bit different. It's very interesting. Text areas are the big extended pieces of text you have. They do have this thing inside of it because you can put like starter info there. That's different to a placeholder. And in fact, when it comes to a form input, a placeholder is John Doe, but you could actually pre-populate this, for instance, with like text like Hayden. And when you give it a value, that's actually saying that's the text I want you to put in there from the start, like this. Similarly, you can make a particular input checked or not by, you know, adding checked. You don't need the equals true, but like, you know, you can add checked there for this. If that's not there, then it's not checked. You know, there's lots of properties. Again, you can Google all of that stuff. So a text area is where you go and put multi-line text. An input type text is for single line text, and a text area is for multi-line text. You can specify the size of this. You can also give it a placeholder too if you'd like to. So if you don't put anything inside of it, you can put, you know, tell us about yourself, ... like this, and then suddenly there's that. You know, it's pretty neat, pretty easy to work with. We also have a select. A select is a drop down. So a select is a drop down box. These are also very, very simple programmatically. Sometimes this might be like this. It's kind of an alternative to radio in a sense. Like radio and selects often achieve the same purpose, but selects are often really useful for long lists. You'd probably find, or when you want it's really when you want the UI to be more compact, because radios you have to see all the radio options at the same time. Whereas for a select, a select is a series of options. And each option has a value, which is kind of like the key. It's like the technical term for the value. So let's say that we have something here that's like, you know, what suburb do you live in Sydney, say? You know, we might have Kensington. And then what's inside the HTML of the option, that's what is actually like displayed on the page. So we might have a few options like this, like say, okay, we got Hurstville. And then we have Chatswood. You know, different places you can live. And what these will turn into on the web page is a drop-down. Oops, I need another BR there. So now you see that my suburb, probably don't. Doesn't matter. My suburb is Kensington. I can click on it and then I can pick certain ones. And if you'd like one of them to be selected by default, obviously you could move it to the top, but you can also just put a selected tag there and then, now that's selected Hurstville by default. If I put it here, it's selected Chatswood by default. So again, a lot more you can play around with there too. Labels are quite interesting. Labels are often tied to checkboxes and radios because what you will often notice when you start playing around with your page is that you have these nice little radios up here, but when you click on them, often you'll want to click on the text intuitively. But when you click on the text, nothing happens, right? You actually have to click on the radio. So the way around that is that if you give your input an ID, such as age 18, what you can do is next to that, let me look at the code example, you'll see that next to that you can actually like use a label and you can say it's for something with a particular ID, and that will kind of tell the browser to link them together. So here if I say, you know what, this is a label for the element with ID age equals 18, what the browser will do now is it knows that when you click on that radio, obviously it's the radio button, but when you click on the text, it will highlight that radio too. This is a great way to improve the usability of your website, because you can just go add a few more here, like age equals 25 or ID equals age 35, like this. Label for equals age 25. Probably should have closed that. Oopsie, making a mess. So we've got our close label there. You got another close label here. There you go, age 35. So now we have a nice little, like, you can kind of click on these text items. So labels are a really, really easy way. Like, it might not feel like a big thing, but you'd be amazed how often you click on the text without realizing, if you don't believe me, but I'm sure most of you do. And then we finally have our button. Our button is exactly what it sounds like. It's a literal button where if I go and let's go and put one down here. Button, click me. Now, because this is just a basic HTML intro lecture, there's not a lot that happens with buttons. Buttons are often used with JavaScript to create some kind of action. So when I click it here, normally we could make it do something like, change color or send the form data somewhere. But today we can't do much. All we're really showing you is that it looks like this. It's an element that you can kind of click on. There is another alternative way to put a button in, which is to create a submit input type. And a submit input type is pretty much identical to a button, except it just is coded a little bit differently. So these two things kind of do exactly the same. Now, a button is generally more useful because it's very versatile. You can use it for a whole bunch of things, which again will make more sense when we do JavaScript. But this input type equals submit, it's kind of the old school way. And what actually happens here and what this is used for is that typically when you have a form, you specify firstly how you want the form submission to go somewhere, which is just going to be a get method. Don't worry about that. Let's just leave that alone for now. And then there's an action, and the action is where it gets sent to. So for instance, if I send it to result.html, what this means is that when this form is submitted, all of the content in this form will be sent to a web page, result.html, and all of the information about it will be sent via the URL. So now if I save this and we refresh our page, pay attention to the URL up here. When I click on the submit button, well, it tried to, file not found. That's okay. This doesn't work because many of these things don't have names. Any form inputs that have names, for instance, first name here, any form inputs that have names, they're all packaged up and sent via the URL there, first name. None of the radios were sent because none of them were clicked, but if I click on one and I send it, you'll see it now says first name equals Hayden and age equals on. Now the reason it says on is because I didn't give any of those radios a value, and I need to give them a value. I know this is quite hard to read, but so let me make it bigger. I need to give them a value. Name equals age. Oh, let me put that ID in the right place so at least it looks consistent. Without a value, it doesn't know what each of these kinds of inputs is called. So now when I say value equals age 18, or maybe I'll just go and copy this. Like that. Now, when I come back to my web page and I click on this and that, when I click me, you'll see it says first name equals Hayden and age equals 25. Now, we don't often submit forms like this in modern web. Everything I've shown you since we have looked at the method and action is kind of, you're not really going to use it much. This is more just for background because it's how the fundamentals work. You'll typically be using fancy JavaScript to deal with inputs, but the point is that what a form block is historically is it's a block where there's a submit button somewhere in there, and when you submit it, it sends all of the data to this URL with this method, and all of the data is encoded by the name and the value. So you'll see here, option has a value. The radios have a value. You'll notice that the select didn't get sent because it didn't have a name. Whereas if I give it a name of suburb, now when I come here and I click submit, you'll see it will now appear in the URL because it had a name. So anything with a name and value is sent. That's how forms work. Again, don't get focused up on that weird sending mechanic that I just mentioned. Focus on the HTML and what appears on the page, because a lot of these old school tags are still used because they have inherent mechanics around like those clicking the radios and the drop downs that are super, super useful. And then later on, we use CSS to maybe clean up how this drop down looks and make it a bit more fun. That's why when you go to, random pages like, again, Google, they have these inputs that feel so much better than what, like this nice input here with this drop down. You click on store and I'm sure there's something here nice. probably no input. Look at these nice buttons, you know, oh, the color, you know. So there's more that they do with that that we will come back to so that you can get more comfortable styling things, really. But for right now, it's really just structural web pages that we're talking about. So last thing then, we have some more interesting HTML. These ones are not used too common. There's actually another lecture called More Tags where you can go and learn about more things you can do with HTML. But for now, you will see that there's a few obscure things. For instance, we have an iframe. An iframe is where you can load in another web page within your web page. It's not copying and pasting it. It's literally creating like a little web browser inside of your web page. I can show you this really quickly. For instance, iframe here. If we then go and load up our first page. Now, Google won't actually let you do it, but there might be some websites out there. Like I wonder if UNSW, let's try UNSW. Let's see if they let you load up a web page inside a web page. UNSW, will they let us? Fingers crossed. Obviously, a lot of websites block this. Yay. So you can just load up UNSW's website within your web page if you'd like to. Again, this is literally loading UNSW's page from their servers, you know, so it's nothing fancy. It's just a little web browser within a web browser. You can change the size of that if you'd like to. We can do some other things, like as you've seen here, we can go and add a video to our web page. Let me just quickly prepare that one for you. So I've just added this file called meetingfun.mov. It's from it's an old video from a meeting at UNSW years ago where everyone did that thing where they tangle their arm, they all grab each other's arms in a circle. And let's say you want to, and they try and untangle themselves. And say you want to include that, well, you can simply do this. You can say, copy this code, video, blah, blah, blah. Now you notice this does have an inner HTML, but that inner HTML, as you can kind of infer, is not anything useful. It's actually just the text that shows if your web browser refuses to load the video. Now, again, I could put in a random MP4 here. If I wanted to find one on the internet, often that's not going to work. But in this case, I can just include my file and hopefully it works. Now that's the name of my file in this folder. That's why meetingfun.mov capital. Let's see if this works. There's the video. Now you see the video is really, really big. I can probably change the size of that. I'd normally just Google this. Let's try and make the width 500 or something like this. If I see how this goes. Okay, so now the width is much smaller, and when I click play, this is the video now playing. So this is all the people here trying to untangle their arms. So if you ever played this game, if you haven't, you should play this game. It's very, very fun. It's very funny. And yeah, that's like, so that video is now included. Now you might think, you know, oh, is that how YouTube works? And it's like, no, they have far more advanced things than this. There's a whole array of like, what I won't go into of why this is not really used, but generally the point is you can use it, and sometimes it is actually used in the very, very background, even though they build all these interesting things on top of it, you know. But it's very powerful what you can do with HTML. Things like this are what allowed YouTube to create more advanced technologies and many other video platforms, for instance. So yeah, that's it. There's a lot more. You can include music on a web page. Have you ever heard sound be played on a web page? You ever visited a website and it makes a little ding sound? It's like, that's typically a sound file that's being loaded through the audio tag, for instance. Music, yeah, the audio tag where you can, you can also add controls to it. That's why you saw that on this web page, there's all that play pause. But if you don't want to give people control, if you just want the video to play by itself, then you just remove that and then suddenly it's just there. And then you think, oh, it's not playing. Well, there's probably like an auto play. So now you can include this video to just play. Should just play. Maybe I need to set it to true or something. Again, you normally Google this. Like, I don't keep all this. I've been doing this stuff for years and you don't really keep it. And you're like, oh, how do I autoplay it? So it's like HTML video tag. And then you look at some properties. You can go to any website, really. It doesn't have to be a particular website. There's autoplay, a Boolean attribute. If specified, the video will begin playback as soon as it can. Okay, and then you go back to your web page and you're like, huh, wonder why that's not playing. You know, it's weird. Did we do something wrong? Potentially. This is why the docs are really important, because, you know, I don't really use this tag, and now suddenly I'm here and I'm like, huh, I don't really know what's going on here. Why is it not playing? There'll usually be some kind of like attribute that's like play it here, which I'm just going to quickly look at. And you can take this further if you'd like to. There's lots more attributes. You can look them up, like here. Where is it? HTML, video. There'll be tons of attributes. You got seek, like you can start a video halfway through. Where are the attributes? Video tag. Yep, video tag. You'll see that there's tons of things here. You can like mute the video. You can loop the video. You can change the width of the video. Lots and lots of things. Preload. Again, tons of things I've never played with, tons of things you'll never play with. The point is that's how it works. So that's just a few of the interesting tags here. Our iframes, our audio, our video. There's more. There's another lecture on it, which is extension. You can go and watch that if you want. But that gives you a basic understanding of HTML. Here's a little note if you'd like to. Doesn't really matter too much. We could go into this in a super amount of depth. But main takeaway here, HTML's a structure. We have lots of form inputs. We have lots of layout tags. Most of what we use HTML for is inputs and layout. And it is the fundamental skeleton that we will then go and paint over in the next lectures. So thank you very much, and hope that was interesting.